Hi, Mr. Weekly. I'm Tyler Smoot, normally in your Tuesday, Thursday classes, and I'm going to be giving my speech on the Great Flood of 1927. Here are my note cards. We'll start off. Bam. And I figured you could just pause this on any moment. We'll do one pan out view from the top. Now, my audience today is going to be my wife, Nicole Smoot. That is George, lack of a better term. There's Sadie. We have a Milo over there, and as you can tell, they're all pretty equally as attentive. Nikki is going to be taking over as my cameraman, and I'm going to get my index cards back in my hand. Nikki, what time are we at?
We just hit 1:15.
1:15. Let's aim for 1:30 on the start.
Okay, I'll count down for you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It said that money is the root of all evil. More specifically, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, it said love of money is the root of all evil. And I feel the love of money really is the root of all evil, at least in the research I've done on the Great Flood of 1927. This research is on the cost of money itself, the pain endured by people, and the time spent on both. First, I'd like to talk about the actual cost of the flood. The National Guard website actually says the flood costs about $1 billion, which is kind of terrifying considering the federal budget that time was only $3 billion. You can see these damages at first glance as being the levees and flood structures along the rivers set in place to protect the towns from stuff like this from ever happening. The most fatal or impressive levee break would have had to have been Mountain's Landing, which is actually the first levee break. It occurred about 12 miles north of Greenville, Mississippi. It had the highest fatalities from levee workers. These are men and convicts that were forced at gunpoint to hoist sandbags, and they kept working until the levees themselves broke away. Different reports all estimate at least several hundred died from this instance alone. And that's just a cost of life, more than money itself. But money's a big motivator, and that actually brings us to the next blunder, which would be Poydra's Levee. Poydra is a small town in the parish of St. Bernard, Louisiana. And what had happened was this flooding had been going on for months at a time. So officials and wealthy individuals decided to purposely bomb the levee outside Poydra, flooding the town and the area, but protecting New Orleans, where wealthier investments were made. This plan's voted on, they succeed with it. Boom, flooding. $2 million in irreversible damages. A couple of weeks go by, and it turns out the river forced its own stress paths to the Gulf of Mexico, necessitating none of that. It was a blunder. It was a waste of time. It's one of the more shocking things of this. And that's where Susan Scott Parrish really comes in. She's one of the expert that gave the speech at the Chicago Humanities Festival in my works cited page. She talks about how some of the damages in the area were 10-foot tall flooding in an area of 10 million acres. That's entire cities, towns, residential areas. And the ways the cities that were chosen to battle this flooding, such as Greenville, didn't have resources most of the time. And this era, this crisis, it really brought out the best in some people, but it also brought out the worst. This was 50 years before FEMA was created, so the Red Cross and private donations are all you had. The Red Cross, they had the saintly connotations, but because of Jim Crow laws in the South and appropriation, they became more like wartime profiteers. When Greenville chose to evacuate, there was the means to evacuate 13,000 plus. Only 33 white women and children were evacuated, where thousands of black women and children were left behind. Even sharecroppers, they were forced to buy their own supplies they're supposed to be receiving for free. The arts provided a surprising beacon of light in this time. They would run charity theaters out west in Hollywood, New York. One of the top billed acts was this Vaudevillian Sisters, the Duncan Sisters. They had a routine from Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it was one of the few moments in the book that really captured the joviality of the South, not the blatant racism. So that was one of the heavy donations. Bessie Smith also ended up writing a hit song at the time, Backwater Blues, and it really drew attention to the problem. And these songs, these vaudeville plays, they really came about on the National Circuit Radio. This was something Herbert Hoover would really pioneer the creation and establishment of in 1927, specifically February. What this did is provided the exposure the South needed to get aid from other parts of the country. And this is really where the humanitarian efforts on a national front start to take their foothold. This is pioneering the territory. And Hoover was rolling in the good blood of the city from all this. He's actually appointed by Calvin Coolidge at the time to lead the relief effort for the flood. Now, that brings me to the last part, which is more of the timeline. We've been over the money that it cost. It was $1 billion, federal budget $3 billion. The human suffering it cost, the segregation of the supplies. Now we have the time. Rain started in September of 1926. The flooding didn't subside till June and July of 1927. That's almost a full year of water and just end times flooding in the South. Terror. On July 1927, the Red Cross actually became responsible for the death of a young African-American man, which really ended the standoff between Greenville and the African-American laborers. Part of this really helped the migration of African-Americans up north. Moton was a man appointed by Herbert Hoover to kind of keep this and other Red Cross encampments, almost prisons, kept quiet and swept under the rug to avoid his bad publicity, especially with the election year coming up. All this really allowed cities like Greenville never to recover. The flood's official ending is around July 1927. And in conclusion, I can't even scratch the tip of the iceberg with the limited time I have. It was so crazy reading about this. But I really do believe money was the root of all evil in this. These was a man-made levee system that caused a man-made disaster. where man took advantage of man. It's terrifying and fascinating to read about in times like this. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to me and the opportunity to share this time. Thank you and good night.